For 10 months, in one of the largest cities in Britain, people were being killed and sold. At least 16 of them, possibly more. And for most of that time, nothing stopped it. The bodies didn't disappear, they were delivered, carried through the streets, brought to a medical school, bought, examined, and then used. Again and again and again. 16 people sold. And the transactions continued. Edinburgh, November 1827. A man named William Burke walks into the anatomy school of Dr. Robert Knox carrying a body. Burke is not a doctor. He's an Irish laborer living in a boarding house run by a man named William Hare. The man who died was one of Hare's tenants, an older lodger named Donald. He had fallen behind on rent. When he died, naturally, Burke and Hare saw an opportunity. Instead of burying him, they brought him to the school. Knox paid £7 and 10 shillings. No questions. The exchange took less than an hour. Knox's school was one of the most respected in Britain. Students traveled from London, from Europe, to study there. Bodies arrived, were examined, and then used. The supply never seemed to match the demand, but the transactions continued. Burke and Hare left with more money than either had earned in months, and they understood exactly what had just happened. The second body followed quickly. Another lodger at Hare's boarding house, a miller named Joseph, fell ill, feverish, weak, a burden. Burke and Hare smothered him. Knox paid £10 this time, no hesitation, no waiting. And then they did it again. And again. Bodies began arriving regularly, too regularly. They had identified something. Fresh bodies were worth more, and fresh bodies were harder to explain. But Knox paid anyway. His assistants logged the deliveries. They noted how intact the bodies were. They signed for them, handed over the money. They said nothing. The method became consistent. They would befriend someone, usually a stranger, often vulnerable, often someone looking for a place to stay. They would offer whiskey. When the person was insensible, Burke would press down on the mouth and nose while Hare held the body still. No marks, no struggle. The body would be delivered within hours. Knox was not a naive man. He was one of the most respected anatomists in Britain, someone who knew exactly what bodies from graveyards looked like. They arrived damaged, decomposing, wrapped in soil and cloth. Burke and Hare's deliveries didn't look like that. They looked recent. And still, it continued, until something happened that should have ended it. A student, standing in the dissection room, looked down at the cadaver on the table and recognized the face. He had seen that person alive on Edinburgh's streets days before. He said something. Knox hushed the room. The lecture continued. The moment passed. Nothing changed. Knox later said he didn't know, that he had no reason to suspect anything. But that claim creates a different problem, because the story that survives isn't stable. Burke confessed twice. The confessions don't agree. Names change, timelines shift, details move. Hare's testimony, given in exchange for his own freedom, contradicts Burke's in places it shouldn't. 16 is the number most often cited. It comes from those accounts, from men who had reasons to hold things back, or reshape what they said. The records that might have clarified it, payment logs, delivery records from Knox's school, are gone. Not misplaced, destroyed. What the true number was is something the surviving evidence cannot answer, and the people who could have answered it made sure it couldn't be. The last victim has a name, Mary Docherty. She had come to Edinburgh looking for her son. On October 31st, 1828, she met Burke. He told her he knew her family. He offered her a place to stay. That night, she was brought into the boarding house. By morning, she was dead. Her body was hidden under a bed. Two other lodgers, a couple named Gray, had been told not to look there. They looked anyway. They found her. They went to the police. By the time officers arrived, the body was gone. Burke and Hare had already delivered it. At Knox's school, it was on the table, being prepared. When police arrived, they found it there. Mary Docherty had been killed during the night. By the next day, she was being dissected in front of students. The people who reported it were treated as suspects. That is what finally stopped it. Not the pattern, not the deliveries, not the people who had seen something they shouldn't have seen. Two people who were told not to look, and did. Burke was arrested, Hare was not. He testified, described the killings, walked free. He was seen briefly after the trial, and then he disappears. No confirmed sightings, no recorded death. Burke was convicted. He was hanged in January 1829 in front of a crowd estimated at 25,000 people. The execution was public. So was what came after. His body was taken to the anatomy school and dissected, the same fate he had been selling to others. His skeleton remains there, still on display. Knox faced an inquiry, no charges. He continued his career elsewhere and maintained that he had done nothing wrong. 4 years later, the law changed. The Anatomy Act. Medical schools would now receive bodies legally, not from graveyards, from workhouses, from the unclaimed, the poor, the transient, the people with no one to speak for them. The supply problem was solved. The bodies continued to arrive, only now the process had a name. For 10 months, people were killed and sold in Edinburgh. The bodies were accepted, logged, used. Nothing stopped. Not the deliveries, not the payments, not the moments when something didn't quite make sense. If the Greys hadn't looked, Mary Docherty would have been dissected and buried before anyone knew she was gone. And the deliveries would have continued. What happened in Edinburgh wasn't unique. It wasn't unusual. It was a pattern, one that appears whenever something is needed badly enough and the questions around it become inconvenient. Sometimes that pattern depends on silence, sometimes on indifference, and sometimes on someone who understands exactly how much can be hidden inside a system that assumes it already knows what it's looking at. Next on Lore&Ruin. In 1941, a man with no intelligence training, no government backing, and no resources walked into the German embassy in Lisbon and offered to spy for the Reich. They believed him. For 4 years, he fed them false information, invented an entire network of agents who didn't exist, and helped shape one of the largest military deceptions in history. His name was Juan Pujol Garcia. The Germans gave him their highest honor. So did the British. Subscribe and you'll be there when it drops.